Hmm. Uh, huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Ruben Olson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues, Campfire Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we got ourselves a couple of Dogman encounters. We're going to cap that off with a Bigfoot encounter at the very end there. But before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. You can also find us on our Patreon, where you can get ad-free, exclusive early episodes. A major shout outs to our newest Patreon member as well, Repetica. Thank you so much for joining the team. We're super happy to have you, and yeah, look forward to moving ahead together here with you. So additionally, if you want to say hi or reach out, you can find us with an email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. And aside from that, a little bit more housekeeping. So previously, we did an episode diving into crop circles, and I just wanted to highlight some of the episodes that we got coming up here this week and the following week. Me and Ruben dived into the Mandela effect, and that'll be coming in about 2 weeks on the main feed. And next week, you'll be able to access on the main feed an episode diving into an encounter situation where I'm joined by a friend of mine, Cuillin, and he basically talks about these experiences that happen paranormal-wise, and then a main experience that occurred when he was out driving. And that actually goes hand in hand with another episode that we did on the show almost a year ago now, and that was only dropped on the Patreon. So we got Cuillin in because he had the same experience and was there, but different perspective basically. So it was very valuable and very insightful having him guest. So shout outs to Cuillin again. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and look forward to that dropping on all the live feeds. Other than that, we're nearing our 50th main episode. So me and Ruben are going to be looking into doing something kind of fun. We're thinking maybe some trivia or something just kind of quirky that we can just kind of like kick back, have a little laugh with, and just have it a little bit knowledgeable as well for everyone that's just inquiring about cryptids and paranormal and aliens and such. So stay tuned for that, because it should be our 50th celebration. We hit our year celebration, but we didn't realize it was a year already, so we missed that ship a little bit. But the 50th episode ship is still in the harbor, so we're going to hit that. Additionally, though, yeah, I think we're going to be diving into some more Bigfoot things. We have some serious discussions that we've been planning where we're throwing around different topics and looking at different research and finding different cool facts. And that's the main cryptid we want to explore a little bit more and see how these topics of research for the Bigfoot are going to apply to other cryptids. But I digress. It's worth it to stay tuned. Check out our social media feeds. You'll be able to see updates and see new episodes dropping early or dropping on the main feed. So there you go. I digress. Without further ado, let's get into our first encounter here. And this will all be quoting. I might bleep out the swear words, but other than that, it's quote unquote. This is a real story that just happened to my friend and I. Literally losing sleep over it. My friend and I are still trying to process exactly what we saw the other day. We've talked it through countless times, trying to logically figure out how this was possible. Hopefully someone on here can give us some thoughts and ideas to what actually happened. So I recently purchased a small bass boat, and my first mate, Legov, and I have been super eager to explore the lake and its islands, as well as learn the fishing around it. We're new to Tennessee. Yesterday on the 4th of July, we decided to go fishing in this very secluded part of the lake. We named No Man's Land because of the low-hanging bridge that prevents boaters from entering the section. My boat can make it underneath because of how small it is, but I've never seen another boat in there. We decided to go deeper into the cove than we've ever been before. As we're slowly trolling down the lake, the path before us splits into 3 forks, and I asked which fork should we take. Lego immediately says the middle one, so we continue straight as the water changes from a large lake to a narrow river-like path. This is where a chain of events happened in quick succession, and we talked through it after the fact to try and recall the order of how this went down. First, we heard a weird vocal-like noise coming from the woods beyond the shoreline, and we both tensed up and felt very uneasy. What was that? Lego asked. A dog, I said, as that was the first thing that came to mind. I don't think that was a dog, Lego answered immediately. Then we saw a bird high above us perching on a branch, staring at us. Maybe it was that bird, Lego said? Yeah, maybe, I answered. I'm not sure when it got into my hand, but at some point I drew my pistol and held it down at my side. Lego held the fishing bow. We both had a very weird feeling as we drifted down the river, eyes glued to the bank. We came to a rotting pine tree that had fallen and was now half submerged in the water, sitting on the shoreline. Then it happened. We hear a very loud, heavy-footed animal running through the woods, getting closer to the water. At first, I thought it was a deer, as it was almost prancing. But as it got closer and louder, we both realized it was in fact not a deer. It was a very large, jet black canine. My brain thought, oh, it must be a coyote, but this was much bigger, like a huge German shepherd, and it was fast, like a black shadow, leaping through the trees and quickly approaching the bank that we were floating across from. It didn't seem to have any texture and details, though, almost like it was flat and blurry. We couldn't see fur, or its face and eyes, just the outline of its body and tall wolf-like ears. But it was obviously the body of a canine. Adrenaline started rushing through us, and my brain raced to think we were about to have to defend ourselves. It almost looked as if it were charging at us, but it was zigzagging and dodging through the trees toward the exact portion of shoreline we were floating past. We were scared, but the 15 feet of water between our boat and the shoreline gave us some confidence. It would have to swim out to us, and I didn't see that as likely. It continued its leaping through the woods and quickly reached our portion of the shoreline. And in one majestic, fluid motion, it leaped off the shore and dove into the water right under the half-submerged pine tree in front of us. Like a stomp, 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 splash. That was it. We held our breath as we waited to hear it swim or move toward us. Small ripples reached our boat from the splash. After the fact, Legoff swears the splash should have been much bigger for a creature that size. Watch for it to come back up, I whispered. I'd never heard of canines being able to submerge themselves underwater, but here it was happening right in front of our eyes. We waited. Nothing. Silence. Just the subtle sound of the ripples it made slowly dissipating. We waited about 20 more seconds and still nothing. It was almost as if the entire forest had shut off. Silence. Our eyes were glued to the fallen pine tree it dove under. Maybe it's just standing in the water under the tree, Legoff says. We got the courage to troll the boat a little closer to inspect the tree, but there's nothing, no sign of anything. At this point, we're in complete shock, stunned. It's gone. How could it be gone? How does something that big just vanish? Especially a creature like that. After 30 more seconds of silence, Legoff breaks it with, You saw that, right? You saw what I saw, right? A shiver flashes down my spine. All of it, I reply. Really though, what the beep was that, Legoff said. I replied, I think we saw a demon, and we both nervously laughed. We stayed floating near the shoreline in shock for at least another 10 minutes, hoping for a sign that we weren't crazy. Legoff scoured the waters, looking to see if it would come up for air, and it never did. How the hell could a big black wolf-like creature disappear into thin air, or water for that matter? Being skeptics, there has to be a logical explanation to what we saw, but we can't find one. If it had just splashed the water and gotten out again, 1, we would have seen it walk away in whatever direction, and 2, we would have heard it, as anything putting weight on the leaves makes a loud noise, but it was just silence, the loudest of silences. We live in Middle Tennessee, if that helps at all. And we're still just a little shaken up by this. End quote. I read this and I reached out and just wanted to talk to him. And I just say, like, I'm glad you guys are okay, because this is terrifying, beyond terrifying. You think you're safe on a boat, and there's many Bigfoot occurrences too where you think you're safe on a boat, and then they do this unpredictable thing. In this case, I've never heard this before, but a dogman just jumping and going right under the water, and the resurfacing not like happening. I'm wondering, maybe there is some potential to tap into, again, my own perspective. When we were speaking with Ron Moorhead a few episodes ago, we talked about the idea that, okay, Bigfoot can kind of transition between our realities. But what if a dogman could do that as well? What if when it jumped in, it kind of shifted itself out of there? Another example of that, and if you've seen Stranger Things is actually a really, really good example of this. There's certain areas where there's like a gateway and you can go in and you get to the upside down. And I think that's a very interesting concept, that perhaps maybe there's just certain areas on this planet that these creatures can access and they can just zip in and out, back and forth. Who knows? But whatever happened here, it sounds like this thing wasn't intending to wait underwater to hunt them because they got out. It sounded like it was making an effort to charge at them, or it was just they conveniently were placed in the path of this creature going to a doorway of some sort. So I mean, it's anyone's guess, really. Moving on from that, though, what do we have here? You know what? I think it's time we just jump to a quick ad break, actually, and then we'll be right back. And we're back. So we have another dogman encounter here as well. And I quote, "Dogman in Texas?" I've always considered having bad luck for multiple run-ins with the paranormal. From skinwalkers to ghosts, this is the most terrifying encounter that I might have ever had. When I was 11, my dad had taken me and my younger brother deer hunting on a ranch in Alice, Texas. He had picked us up from our mom's house at 10 p.m. and we spent 2 hours driving to said ranch. When we got there, our grandpa and older brother were waiting for us, unlocking the gate to the entrance of the ranch, and after a few minutes of cussing and rattling keys, the gate opened. We drove about 10 minutes to get to camp on a long and gloomy dirt road. When we got there, my dad unpacked his and my bag, and I helped unpack my little brother, who was 7 at the time. He woke us up around 5 in the morning to get ready for hunting, and I drew the short end of the straw and had to take my little brother. I'm not that much of a complainer type, but when it came to my little brother back then, he was quite clumsy and noisy. Anyways, he walked us to one of the 4 deer blinds around the property and gave us a quick briefing about gun safety. Now you might be thinking of leaving a gun with an 11 and 7-year-old is not a smart idea. He had already put me in a hunting program that included how to handle firearms. So back to the story. Once he gave us a briefing and my little brother had climbed up into the blind, my dad handed me my rifle. Nothing too fancy, just a 22 something suited for a child to use, and not too much of a kick, but nonetheless still a firearm that should be used properly. We must have sat there for about 3 hours, and the feeders have a timed release of the corn about 30 minutes, and there's some movement in the brush ahead. Out from the brush emerged a 10-point buck and 2 does. My little brother had started to reach for my rifle when I propped up against the wall and carefully swatted his hand away. He looked up at me with this face that I could only describe as a mix between annoyance and anger. He slumped down in his chair, tears in his eyes and his lips quivering. I told him that I was sorry for hitting him at the time. I was conflicted with myself seeing my little brother like this, just really didn't sit with me, so I grabbed my rifle and told him if I had a shot, I'd see what I could do. He just looked and nodded at me. As I aimed through the scope and had the buck in my crosshairs, the doe's head snapped up from eating the corn off the ground, and so did the buck's. I assumed they must have heard me or my little brother, but I didn't remember him crying loudly or my rifle thudding against the wooden slot. No, it was something else. It wasn't because of me or my brother. I've seen this before in documentaries. Their wide-eyed stare and their fixated eyes at the brush. It was like a switch, you know. The forest or brush booming with insects and birds chirping suddenly stopped, and only the wind and occasional breathing from me and the deer. They say when a whole forest goes quiet, a big predator is about, but the only big predators we have this far down in South Texas are coyotes, especially in that ranch. The deer seemed to snap out of their trance and ran off to the opposite direction from where they came. I sat back down with my little brother, who had fallen asleep, and propped my rifle against the wall. I double-checked that it was steady and the door was locked with the bolt in and the padlock secured. And hours passed. It was late evening, and we were already about to get out of the blind when my brother tugged at my arm and pointed at something near the feeder. I looked back and saw something large and bulky on all fours sniffing loudly at the feeders. Assuming it was a wild boar, which are present on the ranch, I grabbed my rifle and sat down in my chair and took aim. Between the fading sunlight and the lack of lighting in the blind, I could barely make out the thing. But as the moon came out, I got a better look at it. And no, it was not your typical full moon bullshit about werewolves. It was a waxing gibbous, and it was enough to light the figure. While I was staring at this thing, chills ran up my spine. What I originally thought was a boar was this large dog. It had the head of a German shepherd, but much bigger. Its upper torso was like a man's, but just covered in dark black fur. Its ears were sharp and perked like a dog's. Its muzzle exactly like a canine should be. Out of nowhere, the thing stood up on its hind legs and started sniffing the air. I looked at my brother, who was white as a ghost, and tears ran down his eyes. When I looked back, it was in front of the window of the blind peeking in. Its sharp, long yellow teeth dripping in saliva and a substance I couldn't see at the time. Its eyes, its piercing yellow eyes, and I swear I saw it smile. Sometimes there's things science cannot explain, or our brains can for certain. After minutes, which felt like an eternity, it started walking around the blind, its loud, heavy footsteps circling the blind and claws dragging across the wooden walls, its loud, unnoticeable sniffing. After 5 minutes, the footsteps stopped. Then I heard a loud thud on the blind. It was on the roof. The blind was at least 5 feet tall, and the thing was tall, if not taller than it, to be able to peek through the window. I took my rifle off the safety and took aim at the roof and shot. I hit something as a blood-curdling howl erupted from the rooftop, then a loud thud and quick, heavy footsteps running towards the brush. A few minutes later, our father picked us up and we told him about our experience. He just told us we were seeing things, eyes merely playing tricks, but we insisted. So, he checked the trail cams. The one near our blind, he saw reflected eyes, right near the blind. Most people know canine eyes reflect light in the dark, and most predators' eyes do so as well. He thought it was a coyote, but he quickly realized the eyes were massive. After a few days, we left, and I've never had another run-in with it since. End quote. This one really, really terrifies me. And again, speaking to the individual that went through this, I commended him for the bravery that was displayed in the situation, especially when you have a younger sibling with you. I mean, I made a point of saying you can freeze in these situations. When you have a Bigfoot or a Dogman, and as an adult, these are things that go against every grain and fiber of our mind that we have not been accustomed to in society. So when this thing appears, it shouldn't exist. You freeze, you don't know what to do. You also have this fear of being hunted, which is a very, very real thing and is terrifying. And that's something primal that I think most humans have forgotten about, putting ourselves at the top of the food chain kind of a thing. So when you have a young child in this situation, you're terrified because you can identify it's a monster, but you're quick because I think you don't have like 60, 50, 40, 30 years of indoctrination by society to think this isn't real. I mean, it plays to an advantage, basically, is what I was getting at. And they still do talk about the occurrence to this day. Again, it definitely hit harder to the younger brother, but I'm just happy that they both have each other. I'm happy that with this situation that occurred, they can bounce the discussion off of each other and they can be there for each other. I think that's incredibly powerful. I know that's something that when I've had my odd UFO experiences, it's just knowing that I'm not the only one that witnessed it, that definitely really helps. But moving on from that experience, again, thank you for letting me share that. We're going to be jumping into our last one of this episode, and the Bigfoot one. And I quote, "Bigfoot story from my mother's childhood, the Swamp Witch." So my mother and my aunt tell the story, and my grandfather can attest to the end of it, at least. I figured I'd share it with all of you to see how it lines up with other accounts. So here we go. When my mom was a young girl in the 60s, they lived in a pretty remote area of Alabama, near a river where they would sometimes go to fish and swim. One day, her and her sister went down the river and claimed they saw something. It had its back turned to them, and they initially thought it was a bear. It has shaggy back hair and was hunched over as if drinking from the river. Bears are not unheard of in the area, though, pretty rare this far south. She says that's when they saw it. Her sister yelped, and it turned around and saw them. And they realized it wasn't a bear. According to them, it stood up about 8 or 9 feet tall, was covered in shaggy back hair, except for its breasts, which they said were saggy and hairless. It was a female, apparently. Its face was human-like, but with a big flat nose and large teeth, which they saw because it started screaming at them and rushing towards them. They described it the way it ran as sort of ape-like. It's swinging its arms wide and sort of lurching from side to side. They both started running back home and say that it was chasing them up the road until a neighbor's dog ran out of its yard and began barking and chasing it away. At which point, it ran into the woods by the roadside. They ran all the way home and told my grandfather, who got his gun and went down to the river, but he didn't see anything. He recalls them showing up and telling him what they saw, so that part is most definitely true. They call it a witch, as this was before Bigfoot was a big cultural thing, and they didn't really know what to call it yet. End quote. Now, I followed up with this individual with a couple of questions, and I asked if this was the only time that this happened, and they confirmed that it was the only sighting that they had heard of in the area, and that his mom never went back to that river. He did say that he went lots of times with his brothers, growing up, but they never did see anything. However, the area is just full of small rivers, creeks, and swamps, so there's a lot of remote places to go and hide in. He also mentioned, too, that he personally thinks that it may have charged his mom and aunt is because they were just small girls and they were scared already. He does believe that these things can kind of smell fear and sense it. Basically, that they were prey or just easy to scare away. Again, just his thoughts on it, but I found that interesting nonetheless. It's just very fortunate that dog was there as well. And he went into mentioning, too, that it was a very big hunting dog, and the area is prime with just boar and other large animals. So for the dog to have done such an aggressive act of defense stems from the fact that it's used to larger animals in the area, which does make sense because a lot of times, you bring dogs out into the woods too, and necessarily they're spooked because they're unfamiliar with it, or they're not necessarily used to larger animals. But in this case, it's close to home, his turf. So already, that's one thing with dogs. They're different out in public, but when you put them at home in the property, they go full guard mode. And I think that's what this dog did. It's a big dog, used to seeing tons of boar, wild animals coming around. But basically, the area is called Fowl River. And again, that's out in Alabama. So I thought that was a very fascinating story. And it was really, really good chatting with you, too, if you're listening. But thank you so much for letting me share that experience. Other than that, that's everything I got for today's episode. So I hope you enjoyed these encounters. Again, thank you to everyone that let me share them on today's episode. It was awesome to get to talk with you guys and kind of explore some questions and other possibilities and insights and thoughts and perspectives. So thank you again very much. And until next time, we'll be back on Monday with our next episode of Encounters. And yeah, you know where to find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, Patreon ad-free early content there. And again, send us an email if you have any questions or just want to say hi, CryptidClues@gmail.com. But without further ado, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Have a good one and stay safe.